What's going on, everybody? It's Ryan Heath with Fantasy Points here, and welcome back again to Data Points. This is the show where I walk you through exactly how to win at DFS, how to win your prop bets, and how to dominate your seasonal fantasy football leagues. And I'm going to do all that, as always, by using the Fantasy Points data suite. So let's get into it for week 12. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
So we're actually starting here in the schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed table on fantasypoints.com. This tool is free for the rest of the season, so you can go ahead and check that out, even if you're not a Data Suite subscriber. And what we're looking for here is the Detroit Lions against quarterbacks. So they're actually all the way down here towards the bottom, just in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So you might say, oh, that's really bad for Anthony Richardson. But it's really not, because up here, we can actually sort by total fantasy points, passing fantasy points, so through the air, or rushing fantasy points. So if we do that and click there, we can see, oh, okay, the Lions are actually a positive schedule adjusted matchup for opposing quarterbacks on the ground, which obviously is how Anthony Richardson scores most of his fantasy points, right? So let's go here into the pass rate over expectation report just to kind of get an idea of what the game script might look like. So the Lions, as always in every game, are pretty big favorites. And according to their pass rate over expectation allowed, because we're here in the defense section of this report, they are a top 5 pass funnel. So teams are generally choosing to throw rather than run in neutral situations against the Lions, or they're deciding to throw more than you would typically expect based on the score, based on the situation, based on the down and distance, right? So that's good, right? We've got a Colts team that is likely going to need to play catch up, going to be throwing the ball. Anthony Richardson's going to have to make stuff happen. That's kind of the spot we want him in, right? And then I'd say the biggest thing here. So we're in our O-line, D-line matchups tool, and I've sorted by pass grade. So you can see the Colts have a top 3 pass grade this week. And that is because mostly the Lions don't actually generate that much pressure. So let's sort by the offense side first. So just by pressure rate allowed, the Colts bottom 6 in pressure rate allowed, not allowing a lot of pressure to their quarterback this year. And then if we sort by pressure rate here on this side for the defense, we can see the Lions also not generating very much pressure. If we go by pressure rate over expectation, which is adjusted for time to throw, the Lions pass rush has been even weaker this year. So that tells us Anthony Richardson is likely not going to be under pressure very often. So let's go over here into advanced passing, and I've already done it for us, but I have used the split tool right here. We split on whether the quarterback was pressured on this play. Hit apply, and you'll get this. So we have a row with all of Richardson's stats on plays he was pressured, and then a row with all his stats on plays he wasn't pressured. And we can see a pretty big difference here. So on plays he's pressured, Richardson only 4.18 yards per attempt, and it more than doubles on plays he's not pressured, 8.79 yards per attempt. If you want to scroll over here, you can see the same thing in the fantasy points per drop back. More than double the fantasy points per drop back on plays he's not pressured. And kind of just for fun, we can also just filter here for plays with no pressure, sort by yards per attempt. And you can see, so even on all these plays where the quarterback isn't pressured, Anthony Richardson ranks 6th best by yards per attempt. I bet you never thought you'd see any situation where Anthony Richardson ranks top 6 in yards per attempt. But unpressured dropbacks this year, that's what he's been doing. He's been making big plays and he's been balling. I really like him on the DraftKings main slate this week. I think he's a solid start once again. Obviously, a very volatile play any week, but this is a good spot for him, in my opinion. So I'm pretty excited to play Richardson in tournaments. I think you can fire him up in your seasonal league lineups as well, though obviously at your own risk. All right, let's move on to data point number 2. So we're actually going to go back here to the pass rate over expectation defense report. But this time I've sorted the opposite direction, right? So we have all of the biggest run funnels at the top here. And we can see that the Dallas Cowboys are a top 4 run funnel on the season. Teams have just been really keen to run on them, right, except for last week, really. But obviously, the Cowboys are 10.5-point underdogs to the Commanders this week. So even PROE stuff aside, fairly good assumption that the Commanders are going to be running the ball a lot this week against the Cowboys. And that's very good for Brian Robinson. As you can see here, we're now in advanced rushing. And I've gone over here and just sorted by the percentage of Brian Robinson's attempts that have come on these man gap concepts, right? So as you can see, he's top 8. It's about 55% of his rush attempts have come on man gap. And we can see how the Cowboys perform against that rushing scheme in advanced rushing defense, right? So if we just scroll over, I've already sorted by success rate, but the Cowboys are allowing the second highest success rate to opposing man gap concepts, which, as we just said, is where Brian Robinson sees the majority of his carries. And finally, we can look back here in the O-line, D-line matchups. This time I've sorted by rush grade, and you can see the Commanders a top 5 rush grade this week. And that is because the Cowboys are allowing the 3rd most adjusted yards before contact per attempt. So a very good line matchup as well. The Commanders, as we talked about, are going to be incentivized to run throughout this entire game. Brian Robinson has a very good red zone role. He is the one that is getting all those red zone carries. So with that high game total we just mentioned, he's the one that's likely to be punching in the touchdowns. I think Brian Robinson is a very, very solid play this week. And then finally, let's move on to data point number 3. So stick with me on this one, guys. I can understand there may be some hurt feelings around this player that we're going to talk about. So we're in advanced receiving defense, just seeing how each defense has performed against each receiving stat. I've already gone ahead and sorted, I've already gone ahead and filtered for only plays where the ball is traveling 20 or more yards downfield. In the air. So deep throws, essentially. And you can see, okay, the Patriots are allowing a decent amount of receiving yards per game on the deep ball, right? The 6th most, almost 55 receiving yards per game just on the deep ball. So here's where I reveal who the player is that I'm talking about. We're talking about Tyreek Hill, guys. So Tyreek Hill has a lot of problems this year, obviously. But one of his problems is he's just kind of run up against a lot of very difficult matchups for the deep ball. So the Patriots are pretty liberal against the deep ball. They allow a lot of yards, as we just talked about. But if we scroll down here, we're going to start seeing all of Tyreek Hill's recent opponents. So the Bills that they've played twice, they're bottom 10 in deep ball yards allowed. Let's see, the Cardinals they played, they're bottom 4. The Raiders they just played, they're the bottom of the league in deep yards allowed. So I'm not saying, Tyreek Hill has just gone up against a bunch of difficult matchups and that's the entire reason he's not himself. Yeah, Tyreek Hill would have shredded all these matchups last year, to be clear. I understand that he is not performing up to what we expected, but in a week where he's just $7,200 on the DraftKings main slate, and honestly, not a lot of people want to play him, having any sort of matchup angle here is going to get me interested because we know what Tyreek Hill's capable of, right? He can drop 30 points like it's nothing, as we've seen over and over. And we have more reason to think that this could be the week for that. So if we go over here into the coverage matrix defense version, we've sorted here just by man coverage rate. And you can see the Patriots play a lot of man coverage. They have played it the third most out of any team this season. We can also go ahead and just search for the Patriots here, split up by week, by opponent, just to see how consistently they play man coverage. I like to do this for my advanced matchups article or with any sort of schematic analysis, just to make sure that the scheme tendency I'm calling out is consistent, right? So as you can see, though, here, the Patriots are fairly consistent. They are playing above 39, 40% man coverage in most of their games, with a few exceptions. I will point out and caveat that one of the exceptions was the last time they played the Dolphins in week 5. They actually played their lowest rate of man coverage all season in that week. But I will say that was with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. The game plan isn't necessarily going to be the same. And I think people have this idea that teams don't want to play man coverage against offenses with really good receivers. It's kind of true for too high. Like if you look at the highest rates of too high faced, it is like the Dolphins, the Bengals, the Cardinals, just teams trying to limit those scary downfield threats. But man coverage, that's not really the case. The Dolphins have faced a fairly average amount of man coverage this season. I don't think teams are specifically targeting zone coverage against Tyreek Hill or anything like that. So I think there's a well above average chance that the Patriots play a lot of man coverage against the Dolphins this weekend. That's a very long, rambly way of saying that. And what does that mean for Tyreek Hill? I guess I buried the lead here. So against zone coverage here in advanced receiving, I've sorted for zone. You can see, yeah, this feels like Tyreek Hill this year, right? Just 19% target share against zone. Jonnu Smith having a higher yards per out run against zone than Tyreek Hill, 2.85 to 1.96. Yeah, that's all gross. Let's turn this to man coverage, and you can see it's a lot better. It's not quite Tyreek Hill in 2023, but he has been significantly better against man coverage this year, which you'll be able to see as soon as it pops in here. Here we go. So yeah, now we're up to a 24.7% target share against man coverage. Yards per out run easily leads the team, 2.3 yards per out run. Since the start of last season, Tyreek averages nearly 3.9 yards per out run against man coverage, top 2 among all wide receivers. Again, obviously, we know he hasn't been performing up to that this year, but I'd like to think he's still capable of it, of shredding man coverage. And again, he is probably not going to be that highly owned. He is a pretty enticing tournament play to me based on these matchup angles that we've talked about. If there's even a 10% chance he goes nuclear, then I want to have exposure to that. So that's all, guys. Now that you've seen how powerful the Fantasy Points data suite can be, make sure you go to data.fantasypoints.com to sign up for access to the data suite for yourself. We have a standalone data suite subscription, or we have the all-in package, which also gets you access to my DFS picks and my prop bets informed by stats just like the ones in this video. Good luck in week 12, everyone.